Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Eddrick Show. Happy New Year. This is our first edition of 2026. I want to thank you for joining us. This is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and you get notified when I post content on my channel. Very distinguished guest today. My guest is W. Ralph Eubanks. He's here to discuss his new book, When It's Darkness on the Delta: How America's Richest Soil Became Its Poorest Land. Ralph currently serves as a faculty fellow and writer in residence at the Center for Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss. His distinguished career in academia and the publishing industry includes previous roles as Director of Publishing at the Library of Congress and editor of the Virginia Quarterly Review. Ralph is a 2007 Guggenheim Fellow and was a 2021-2022 Fellow at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. He's also the author of his previous books, which are several important Southern-themed books, including A Place Like Mississippi, The House at the End of the Road, and Ever is a Long Time. Ralph, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Let's get into this conversation. Remarkable
Okay.
book. The timing is perfect. So let me ask you, speaking of the timing of the book, what motivated you to want to write this particular book, and why is it important to tell this story now?
This is a book that's really been about 10 years in the making. I arrived back in Mississippi on January 13th, 2016, to teach at Millsaps College. I had been back in Mississippi doing some reporting on broadband access, the lack of broadband access in the Delta, which got me interested in this story about the Delta. It took me a while to kind of figure out what my particular voice or take would be on this place, because it's a place that lots of people have written about, lots of people claim to understand, but never really try to seek to understand. So I set out to try to begin to grapple with this place. It's a place that my family once lived. My father moved to the Delta in 1949 after graduating from Tuskegee Institute and went to work in a community called Mileston, which was a resettlement community from the Farm Security Administration from the Great Depression. And this is a place that turned Black landowners into farmers, into sharecroppers into landowners. So going back to Mississippi got me interested in the Delta. I was spending a great deal of time in very elite spaces, and I'm in the poorest state in the union, yet I never see a poor person. So that led me to begin to drive around the Delta. So a lot of the places that my father took me when I was a boy, and it made me begin to ask questions about why we went to the Delta so often, his relationship with that place, how so many of his friends who were Tuskegee graduates also ended up in the Delta. There were just all these questions that I began to have. So I wanted to begin to explore the Delta and and my relationship to this place.
There is a gigantic amount of irony in your title, which I want to ask you about, which is America's richest soil became its poorest land. Can you elaborate on that, the irony of that statement, and why such a land that is so rich with the ability for agriculture and just some of the richest soil literally in the world is also one of the poorest places in the world?
Yes, I mean there is a great irony in the title, especially the subtitle. I mean the main title comes from a song from 1932 that's kind of, it's When It Starks in the Delta, that talks about the romance of the Delta.
Sure.
So that's a song that's very much part of the mythology of the place. And so you kind of got the reality, the mythology in the main title, and the reality in the subtitle.
Yes.
And so, and the reason that it has become this richest soil is because it is a place of extraction. People have sought to extract as much as they can from the place through cotton, soybeans, through large industrial farming operations. through plantations, through the pesticide industry, and yet left people who were once a crucial part of that impoverished. And those were Black people who were there working as sharecroppers, or, who worked the land, who also worked to create the place, whether it was the levees along the Mississippi River that prevent flooding, or it's the fields themselves. So it is this place of very rich soil with wealth concentrated among a limited number of people, but with this great poverty. And it's this rich soil um, that food can't really come from. So there are lots of food deserts in this place of rich soil. So there are these great ironies that kind of exist in this place. And with that, as I said, there is the mythology. So during the course of writing this book, I had three big questions for myself. What are the policy, political, and cultural issues that have disadvantaged the people of the Mississippi Delta? What are the myths that keep us from seeing them? And what role does race play in shaping those myths? So those are the things that I began to grapple with. But I would also have to add that there was a fourth question that I had to begin to contend with. And what were my own mythologies about the place? And I had to begin to wrestle with some of those in order to really find the right voice to tell the story.
I had a question later on. I was going to ask you about policies, but since you brought it up, let's go there now. Um, can you touch upon, because your story basically talks about how a group of people who were enslaved, sharecropping, and then had opportunities, or at least some opportunities, although they were denied in many respects, to become landowners, to become self-sufficient. And there were policies to try to address that and help folks do that. Um, and there's still policies today, or at least a couple of years ago, that have been implemented to try to address some of those inequalities. So over the years, so can you touch upon some of those specific policies that were enacted to try to help folks, and maybe touch upon some of the resistance that happened due to the implementation of these policies?
Yes, I mean, so Milestone is this place that it's now the largest segment of Black-owned land in the Mississippi Delta. And but it's the only Black resettlement community in Mississippi, whereas there were several that were proposed. And the fear was, if there were more Black land owning segments in Mississippi and the Mississippi Delta, that that would disrupt the power balance. And the white landowners wanting to maintain that power. One of the things that I did is I went through a lot of the archive of the Farm Security Administration, looking at how Mississippi politicians looked at Milestone very skeptically, and how they kept more of those resettlement communities from coming to Mississippi. Several of them were planned. Because the Farm Security Administration saw that I think it's what they said is, we need to do something for the Negro of the South, particularly the Negro of the Delta. And Mississippi politicians kept that from happening. So there could have been more milestones, but they were limited. And the great fear was, once these people own land, the next thing they're going to want to do is to vote. And that is exactly what happened in Milestone. That was the first group of people in Holmes County to register to vote. And when the authorities thought they could stop them from voting because, they're probably on the welfare rolls, they weren't. They were landowners. They were part of a cooperative. They were independent. So these policies were trying to prevent Black people from becoming independent landowners, farmers, and business people. So so when you look at a place like the Delta and you look at the poverty, it's not that very often the way that we think about poverty, particularly Black poverty and rural poverty in the South, is that it is something that is a personal failing. But what it actually is it was done by design. And that is really one of the things that I think we have to begin to grapple with is how poverty in places of deep disadvantage, whether it's in the Delta or elsewhere in this country, has been done by design. Mississippi is not the only place where that happened. There are other places like it across the country, including the Black Belt of Alabama.
As you traveled and did your research for the book, um, what were some of the things that, and when I have an opportunity to have authors on who write about topics like this all the time, just from a personal standpoint, what angered you, if anything? I mean, was there anger? Was there, did you have to step away? I mean, just on a personal journey as an artist and an author, telling the story could not have been easy, especially given the fact that you've interwoven your own personal narrative with your family as well. So, talk to me about some of the feelings and emotions you went through in writing this book.
I went through a lot of things. I mean, there were moments of anger, intense anger, when I began to see how powerful politicians, as the historian um, you know once said to me that they fought a war on the war on poverty.
Yes.
And that is that one of the things that I, having to that, knowing that made me angry. And then realizing that for years we have looked at the war on poverty as a failure. Ronald Reagan famously saying we fought a war on poverty and poverty won. No, it's that we fought a war on the war on poverty and the war on the war on poverty won. That really made me angry. Uh, because that meant that there was an opportunity to create real change in the Delta that a lot of Mississippi politicians felt was not worthy of being acted upon, largely because the people who would have benefited from it would have been Black people. So other things that really kind of were emotions that were really difficult for me to confront along the way, I would say it's also my own the ways that myself that I didn't see poverty on the landscape. That in some ways poverty had become part of the landscape. And I think that that's something that so many of us as Americans do. We look out at a place and we see poverty, but we don't see it because it's just part of the landscape. So what I began to do as part of the process of writing this book is begin to look at a place and ask myself questions about why is this building abandoned? What else is here? Why is that here? Why has that been abandoned? So those were hard questions I had to ask myself about, why had I not seen this before? Why am I just beginning to see this now? And I realized if that is happening to me, there are lots of people who are looking at it that way. So, in so many ways, I say that this is a book that I hope will begin to change people's way of seeing the Delta and places like it, so that we begin to see poverty rather than simply drive past it. Or we begin to see a place like the state penitentiary at Parchment, a place that we drive past, that we think of as a place that is keeping us safe. I mean, I spent some time in Parchment teaching there, learning what actually goes on there and recognizing that this is a place where you see poverty and violence intersect. And those two things, poverty and violence, go hand in hand. And we have to begin to reckon with some of those issues. And I had to begin to reckon with some of those myself. That's probably the hardest thing about writing the book for me. That, I'm thinking that I'm in tune with some of this, but realizing once I go into the deep realities of it, there's so much I have not wrestled with.
You write about your father and his role and some of the attempts he was making to try to rectify some of the inequalities of sharecroppers who were trying to become landowners, and that whole process and just how all of that worked. Can you talk about the decision to include your own personal narrative in the story, and something you've done previously, and also related to that, um, how has your family reacted to maybe some of the things that you may or have uncovered, or what's been your family's reaction to putting such a personal narrative out there about some of the things that your family had to go through?
Well, I felt that I had to really, for two reasons, I had to make this very personal. I think it was in order for me to find the voice to tell the story. I'm also writing about a place that I did not grow up. My family actually left the Delta.
Right.
So if I'm being honest, I have a little bit of survivor's guilt. One
Mm-hmm.
of my close friends said to me, if your family had remained in the Delta, the way you look at the world would be completely different. And I believe that I felt a freedom that my friend didn't feel from growing up in the Delta. I had this freedom to kind of go out and explore the world. He felt that he had to commit his life in some way to improving the circumstances of the people from that place. So that personal narrative was something that I really had to begin to reckon with. And I also had to look very closely at my father's own relationship with it, his idealism of coming into this place and not really recognizing exactly what he was up against
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about the ways that Tuskegee prepared these men and sent them off to the Delta. It actually goes back to the 1927 flood and Robert Moton's role with working with Herbert Hoover during the flood and kind of being his public relations bagman for the Black people who were stranded on the levees. But in the end, what he does is he sends people to the Delta to try to work to improve the place. And my father, going all in with his idealism. But there's something that I often think about that comes from Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, where he says, you look at the statue of, Booker T. Washington. Is he lifting a veil off his people, of ignorance off his people, or is he pushing a veil over? And I think in some ways, they did both with my father. They lifted that veil off him, but they also pushed a veil over that allowed him to go into this place with this almost impossible task. And but then, the other thing that's part of that I think that he didn't know is that we don't know. My father goes there in 1949. This is 5 years before the Brown decision.
Right.
No one could have predicted the violence that would have come up in the wake of the Brown decision, including the murder of Emmett Till and the dissolution of Providence Farm, which is in Holmes County, where my father is then working as a county agent. And that violence coming in to affect our family personally, leading for us to leave the Delta, a place he never wanted to leave. And that was one of the things. Why did he never want to leave? And finding people who knew him, who he felt that this is a place he could change. But then I actually came to recognize that the place that I grew up south of the Delta in the Piney Woods, in so many ways, that 80-acre farm that we bought um, mirrored so much of what he was doing in Mileston. So in a lot of ways, he kind of created what he thought he could have in the Delta in another place, but still in the South.
In looking at the Delta today in the context of your book, um, are you optimistic that obviously there's still some things that need to change? What would I know obviously there's so many complexities to this question, so I know you can't answer it on spot, but let me just ask it in general. Um, if you had to provide an analysis of the Delta today after writing this book, are you hopeful? Do you think things could change? I mean, what's your take on where the Delta is
I
today?
I think that there are people who could change it. I mean, I've interviewed some of them, Tim Lampkin in Clarksdale with his organization Higher Purpose, Gloria Carter Dickerson and Drew with her We Together Creating Change. And Gloria says something that is really profound. She says, hope is not a strategy. And So Gloria really has come up with a strategy for kind of changing the mindset of people. And I think Tim Lampkin is doing some of that work. There's so many young people that I've met who are committed to creating some type of change in the Delta. Some of that came through this summer with the release of Sinners.
Hmm.
And they had a screening of it in Clarksdale,
Clarksdale,
Mississippi,
right?
a place without a movie theater. Ryan Coogler actually comes to Clarksdale and is, for these screenings. And that weekend of those screenings, I met so many young people who were devoted to this place and to changing it. And I thought, these are the seeds of change right here. The question remains, what will government do to kind of keep that going forward? Because one of the things that I learned in the course of this is how much what I call social change philanthropy has not really worked in the Delta. It has to be a combination of philanthropy, individual activists, government, monetary policy from the Fed. All of those things have to work together to create change in the Delta. The one caveat that I will say that with my optimism for the Delta is that will the state of Mississippi and will larger government operations become involved in thinking about this in a way that's constructive? That's the thing I don't know. And that's the thing that I would say politically, looking at the political landscape, that doesn't seem possible. Yet the people there are the most determined people I have encountered in my life. And I believe they are committed to it, regardless of whatever anyone else says, because they know that no one else is coming to save them.
As we get ready to wrap up, I just want to let you know I had a chance to visit Mississippi in 2024 in Jackson, Mississippi. I was there on with Varner PR, a company I work for, and we were doing some work with the National Association of Black Journalists Region 3 on raising awareness about HIV and AIDS in the Black community, which is
Yeah.
not very good down in the South. But I got a chance to spend some time with Alice Tisdale, and Miss Tisdale is the professor. I mean, the editor emeritus of the Jackson Advocate, and I got an opportunity. She gave us a tour of the NAACP headquarters, which is right across the street from Jackson State University. We got a chance to go to the museum. And as a kid growing up, I'm from California, and we used to go to Arkansas every year. It struck me just how significant Mississippi is in the history of this country. Literally ground zero for a lot of the uh, forces that were trying to get freedom and the forces that were trying to deny freedom. Can you just talk about the importance of Mississippi historically as it relates to American history?
Oh, I think Mississippi's a mirror to America. I mean, that's one of the things that we don't think about enough. So often I will say that to people in the Northeast, and they will want to say, no, Mississippi is a cultural and political other.
No.
And it is not. And as I often say to people these days, we are all living with one foot in Mississippi, whether we want to admit it or not. And I think we have to come to terms with that. But yes, I believe from writing this book that I have, Mississippi, I mean, the Mississippi Delta, in his masterful history of the Delta, historian James Cobb proclaimed it the most southern place on earth. That is an apt description. But I will also say it is the most American place on earth, because that is where you can begin to see the roots of income inequality in this country. It is all there in the Delta. You can see that with racial inequality all through Mississippi, but especially in the Delta. It is it is this mirror. And one of the things that I talk about in the book at the end of the book is that there is this veil we have placed over this. So we don't see things. We don't see the South in this way. And what I want people to do is to take that veil off, begin to look closely in that mirror, and begin to see not Mississippi looking back at you, but America looking back at you. Because Mississippi is not the South writ large, it's America writ large.
Well said. Thank you for that. Well, Ralph, if people want more information about you or the book, where can they go?
Well, they can find information about me at wralpheubanks.com. The book is available from booksellers everywhere beginning January 13th. If you want to buy from an independent bookstore, I would say go to bookshop.com. If you'd like a signed copy, you can actually order a signed copy from Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi.
Excellent.
And I would really encourage people to to buy from indie booksellers.
Excellent. Excellent. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Ole Miss. You guys going to do it against Miami coming up?
Well, I have to say what I've got right here, right now is
Here we go.
I've got it.
There you go.
I'm really, it's like we've got to do it. I, we've got to beat Miami. We've got to get. I know Indiana will be there in the final, and I want Ole Miss to be there for a number of reasons. Now, to be honest, I haven't been to an Ole Miss football game in
Sure.
30 years,
Sure.
even though I
Sure.
teach at the university.
Sure.
But I would really love to see Ole Miss take a national title, and I believe we can do it.
Excellent. It's an amazing story. If they do, that will be one of the most incredible stories in the history of sport. I mean, to go through what you guys have gone through over the last month, and to if they win the championship,
Yes,
that's movie kind of that there's a movie there for sure.
I know.
All right. Well, W. Ralph Eubanks, author of the new book, When It's Darkness on the Delta, How America's Richest Soil Became Its Poorest Land. I want to thank you so much for coming on the Eddrick Show. I really appreciated our conversation.
I enjoy talking with you. Thank you so much for having me here today.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. This has been another edition of the Eddrick Show. As promised, intelligent conversation with interesting people. Hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell. You'll get notified when I post content on my channel. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode.